Chicago didn't sleep much in 1929. Even in the dead of night, the streets had a pulse, slow, heavy, like a drunk man's heartbeat. The fog rolled low across the south side, clinging to the boots of the men who walked with their collars up and their guns close. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone whispered through an open window. It wasn't music for dancing. It was the kind of song you heard when you were thinking about the last thing you ever did wrong. And wrong. Chicago had plenty of that. Al Capone sat at the back of the Lexington Hotel, his suit pressed, his hands smooth, his eyes lazy but never tired. A man like him didn't rest. He waited. Even sleep had to ask permission. His men moved like shadows, not loud, not messy, just there. Always there. The room smelled of cigars and burnt coffee, the wallpaper peeled in corners. But nobody dared point it out. There was too much money in the building for anyone to notice the small rot. That's how Capone liked it. Luxury above, rot beneath. He understood the balance. He leaned back in his chair, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling. "They're getting too bold," he muttered. The man across from him shifted. Joey had been with him since the old days, before the suits, before the hotel, before the blood was cleaned up with bleach and payoffs. "You talking about Ness?" Joey asked, his voice low, respectful. Capone nodded. "The Fed, the Boy Scout, the one they call Untouchable." Joey chuckled, but it came out nervous. "He ain't touched nothing yet." Capone didn't laugh. "He's not about touching," Capone said quietly. "He's about watching, and watching gets you close." There was a long silence then. Not the comfortable kind, the kind where a man starts thinking too much, where you wonder if your name's already been whispered to the wrong ears, where the air gets tight and your collar starts to itch. Capone poured himself a drink. The good stuff. Not the bathtub gin he sold to the suckers out west. He drank it slow, like he had time. "Get me names," he said finally. "Judges, cops, rail workers, anyone who talks to Ness, anyone who thinks about him." Joey nodded and stood, but Capone stopped him. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight I want to hear the streets breathe." Just a few blocks north, Eliot Ness wasn't breathing easy either. His office smelled of damp files and sweat. The fan in the corner squeaked every 6 seconds. The papers on his desk were stacked neat, but that didn't mean they made sense. There were ledgers full of fake names, maps marked in pencil, photographs of dead men no one wanted to claim. He didn't sleep much anymore. Not because of fear, but because the moment he closed his eyes, he saw the girl. 12 years old. Wrong place, wrong time. Stray bullet in a liquor raid. That wasn't Capone's bullet. It wasn't even his men. But it was his war, and Ness had buried her name like a stone in his chest. That's when he knew he couldn't back down. He stood at the window now, looking out at the city. Lights blinked through the fog. Somewhere, a siren howled, distant, like a wounded animal that knew nobody was coming. "Do you ever feel like we're chasing ghosts?" one of the younger agents asked from behind him. Ness didn't turn around. "No. Ghosts don't drive Packards or wear $1,000 shoes." "Then what do they wear?" Ness smiled, thin and bitter. "Fear. They wear fear like a second skin." The young agent didn't reply, just went back to sorting through the new files from the dockyard. Ness lit a cigarette and stepped closer to the glass. Across the street, 2 men leaned against a lamppost. They weren't talking, weren't smoking, just watching. He exhaled smoke slowly. "Tell the others," Ness said without looking. "We're being watched. Let them watch. Let them know we're not afraid." And as the night deepened, 2 men, on opposite sides of the law but both too tired for sleep, stood in silence, miles apart but already headed toward the same end. Because in Chicago, you didn't choose the hour you died. You just tried to stay awake long enough to see it coming. It was just past 3 a.m. when the street underworld started stirring. Not with violence, not yet, but with movement. The kind that didn't make the papers, the kind that slipped through alleyways, behind warehouses, inside the guts of train yards and hotel basements. Chicago was never still. It only pretended to be asleep. Al Capone's men worked best in the shadows. They weren't flashy like the ones in the pictures. They didn't wear pinstripes or carry Tommy guns just to show off. That was for suckers. These boys, the real operators, wore plain jackets and kept their mouths shut. They could strip a car, swap a license plate, smuggle 10 barrels of Canadian whiskey across a police checkpoint, and never leave a fingerprint. And they answered to Capone. Only Capone. That night, 3 of them, Frankie, Nunzio, and Lou, were out behind the 14th Street warehouse, waiting on a truck that was already 2 hours late. Rain tapped gently on their hats and jackets, the kind that never poured, but soaked you slowly, like guilt you never noticed until it was deep in your skin. "Truck's late again," Nunzio muttered, chewing on a toothpick like it was the only thing keeping him calm. Frankie lit a cigarette and gave Lou a long, quiet look. "Could be they got spooked. Feds have been sniffing around the South Loop all week," Lou shrugged, keeping his hands buried in his coat pockets. "Or Capone's testing us. See who complains first." Nunzio cursed under his breath, looked out into the fog. They waited in silence. Not because they didn't have anything to say, but because trust was a luxury in their world. Even a friend could become a problem with the right offer, the wrong woman, or one bad night of whiskey. Finally, headlights broke through the dark. Not loud, not rushed, just steady. A single truck, dull gray, dented hood, 2 men in the front seat. It pulled up beside them and stopped. The driver rolled down the window just a few inches. "Where's the bird flying tonight?" he asked. Frankie answered, "West to St. Louis, if the wind don't break." The driver nodded. Code checked out. Nunzio opened the back. Barrels. Not marked, but they didn't need to be. Anyone who'd ever smelled real bourbon knew the cargo was clean and worth killing for. Lou checked one with a small hand drill, caught a drop on his fingertips, sniffed, then smiled. "She's pure." The truck didn't stay long. It was moving again within minutes, heading west with 2 armed escorts trailing a mile behind. And back in the Lexington hotel, Capone already knew about it. He always knew. He had ears on the street and eyes inside the department. Men who'd sworn oaths to the badge, now taking envelopes from the back of a butcher shop. He was sitting with his barber, a wiry little man who trimmed hair like he was carving marble. Capone liked it that way. Precise, slow, almost sacred. "You hear about that kid from the north side?" the barber asked carefully. Capone narrowed his eyes. "Which one?" "The one who tried to knock off the Turkish club, got clipped in the leg and left in the alley. Real messy." Capone didn't reply right away. He stared into the mirror, eyes focused, like he was watching a version of himself he didn't recognize anymore. "I hear a lot of things," he said finally. "But I don't listen to cowards who die without doing damage." The barber nodded, didn't press. "You didn't press Al Capone. Not if you liked your fingers attached. Across town, Eliot Ness was awake before sunrise. He never set an alarm. His body just knew. Years of chasing bad men taught him that sleep was a privilege, not a guarantee. He washed his face with cold water, drank black coffee, and read the same page of scripture every morning, not because he was religious, but because it reminded him some men tried to live clean, even in a world built on dirt. His apartment was small, too small for a man who held the city's worst secrets in his hands. But Ness didn't want comfort. Comfort made you soft. Soft got you followed. Followed got you buried. He stood in front of his closet, same gray suit, same brown shoes. Same .38 revolver tucked into the small of his back. He looked at himself for a long moment before grabbing his badge. Prohibition agent, Department of the Treasury. It didn't shine like it used to. Maybe it never did. By 6 a.m., he was in his office, already flipping through a report from a wiretap planted in a crooked accountant's apartment. He didn't trust wires, not fully, but they gave him glimpses. Glimpses led to names, and names, if handled right, led to bodies. Agent Delaney walked in with a thin folder. "This just came from Customs," he said. "Manifest logs for the freight that came through Michigan Harbor last night. 26 crates of machine parts." "You believe that?" Ness flipped through the papers. His eyes caught a name, one he'd seen 3 times in the last 2 months. "Merino Freight?" "Yeah." Ness tapped the file lightly, like he was thinking out loud. "They're running something from Windsor. Clean on the books, dirty underneath. Delaney raised an eyebrow. You think it's Capone? I don't think, Ness replied. I know. He didn't raise his voice when he said it. He didn't need to. His certainty had weight. It hung in the room like the scent of gun oil. Delaney hesitated. So what now? Ness stood, grabbed his coat, holstered his weapon. Now we start cutting off his arms, one crate at a time. Later that day, while the city sweltered under a late summer haze, Eliot Ness and two of his men raided a warehouse in Burnham. It wasn't flashy, no gunfire, no newspaper reporters, just 3 cars pulling up slow, 5 agents walking in steady. Inside, workers froze. Some tried to run. Ness didn't yell. He just moved through the aisles, pointing, counting, marking, barrels, boxes, bottles, all illegal. One worker, no older than 22, tried to lie about the paperwork. Ness stared at him until the kid folded. You gonna arrest me? The boy asked. Ness nodded. For lying, he said, not for working. It wasn't about destroying lives, not for Ness. It was about cutting off the rot before it spread. But sometimes you had to bury the whole limb to save the body. Capone got word of the raid before sunset. He was eating dinner at a private club on Cicero Avenue. The meal was steak, garlic potatoes, and a 1921 bottle of Bordeaux he didn't bother pretending was grape juice. His men ate with him. The laughter was thick. The music was soft. Then a man leaned in and whispered in Capone's ear. Capone didn't flinch. He chewed his bite slowly. Swallowed, sipped his wine. Warehouse on Burnham? He asked quietly. The man nodded. Capone wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin. How much did we lose? About 16 grand, give or take. Capone didn't shout, didn't throw his glass. He just looked down at his plate and said, 16 grand is a message. Lou, seated across the table, asked, and what's the reply? Capone looked up, eyes cold, steady, the kind that don't need words. That night, Ness was alone in his office reviewing confiscation forms when the phone rang. He picked it up on the second ring. A voice, low, gravelly, unreadable, spoke. You think you did something today? Ness didn't answer. You think taking a few barrels off a dock makes you a hero? Still nothing. We know where you sleep, Agent. You won't always be this lucky. Click. Ness sat there for a long while, the dial tone humming in his ear. He didn't write anything down. He didn't tell his men. He just leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Because it wasn't the threat that bothered him. It was the voice. He recognized it. And if that man was calling him, the war had changed. No more watching. No more warning shots. Capone was finally ready to get his hands dirty again. And Eliot Ness, he was more than ready to bury the legend with the man who made it. 2 nights passed. The city didn't talk much in those 2 days, but the silence said enough. When street rats stopped running numbers and bartenders started forgetting faces, something was moving beneath the surface. Chicago wasn't loud all the time. It just waited for the right moment to scream. Al Capone sat in the back of his private tailor shop, a cigarette tucked between 2 thick fingers. He didn't puff. He just held it, letting it burn slow while his eyes traced the map on the wall across from him. The map wasn't official. No borders, no highways, just color-coded pins, red for paid-off judges, blue for safe houses, yellow for loyal muscle, and black for where blood had been spilled. Every week the pattern shifted. Every month the lines blurred more. Burnham hurt, said Frankie, stepping into the room without knocking. He knew Capone hated that, but Frankie had earned the right. Capone didn't look up. I told him not to store everything in one place. Did they listen? No, Frankie said. They didn't. Capone crushed the cigarette in an ashtray that looked more like a stolen piece of art. Everything Capone touched felt expensive, even his anger. You know what hurts me? Capone asked. Frankie waited. He knew it wasn't a real question. I built this thing from scraps, Capone went on. Backroom poker games, cheap whiskey, dirty cops, and now some pencil neck in a cheap suit wants to take it all with a badge and a frown. Frankie finally spoke. He's not backing down. No, Capone said. He's not. But I can make him bleed in ways he won't see coming. There was a knock at the back entrance, a soft double tap, one beat, then two quick. Capone's eyes shifted. That was a signal only one man used. Frankie opened the door. It was Benny, not a hitter, not muscle, but a listener. Benny had ears all over town, in barbershops, train stations, union halls. Nobody noticed Benny. That's why he was valuable. He stepped in, nervous. "I heard something," he said. "Good," Capone said, waving him forward. "Talk." Benny swallowed. "There's a rat in the South Dock crew, talking to Ness." Frankie stiffened. "Name?" Benny hesitated. "Don't got one, yet. But he's giving roots. That's how they knew about Burnham." Capone leaned back, quiet. "You sure?" he asked. "I heard it from two places, separate." Capone looked over at Frankie. "Start pulling every dock worker one by one. I want eyes. I want their wives followed, their cousins, their girlfriends. Somebody's leaking." "What about Ness?" Frankie asked. Capone smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Let him chase shadows. I'm going to bury him in his own noise." Across the city, Eliot Ness was moving differently. He wasn't sleeping at home anymore, not since the call. He changed locations every 2 nights. Sometimes a motel on the West End, sometimes a soft flat above a bakery near Lincoln Park. He didn't tell anyone where he'd be next. He carried 2 weapons now, one strapped behind his back, the other in a small ankle holster. His men noticed. They didn't ask questions. One evening, Ness sat alone on a rooftop above Maxwell Street Market. It was after hours, the stalls all empty, but the city's pulse still beat below. Smoke from chimneys, distant chatter from open windows, footsteps from the alley. Nothing ever fully slept in Chicago, not the buildings, not the men. Agent Delaney joined him, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. "You always did like the high ground," Delaney said. Ness took the cup and nodded, quiet. They stood together in silence. Not the kind that needed to be filled, the kind only men in dangerous jobs understood. The kind that tasted like regret and black coffee. Delaney finally spoke. "The call shook you." Ness didn't answer. Delaney tried again. "We're making dents, Eliot. The raids are working. The paperwork's stacking. We'll get him." Ness stared down at the empty market below. "You ever burn ants with a magnifying glass when you were a kid?" he asked. Delaney blinked. "What?" "I did, just once. Watched one squirm under the heat. I stopped before it died." He paused. "Capone's not an ant, and I'm not holding a magnifying glass. I'm holding a match." Delaney exhaled through his nose. "And if you light it?" "I don't stop until the fire spreads." Later that week, word hit the streets that 2 dock workers were found dead behind the old rail yard, one with a crushed windpipe, the other with 5 bullets in the chest. The cops found nothing. No witnesses, no suspects, no motive. But Ness knew, and so did Capone. The game had entered a new phase, not courtroom threats or warehouse raids. Now it was personal. Now it was pressure. Ness doubled his team, had agents trail every man with a connection to Capone's liquor routes. He authorized wiretaps without clearance. He pushed harder, louder, faster. Capone felt it, but he didn't bend. He invited city officials to private dinners, gave checks to orphanages, posed for cameras in $1,000 suits with kids he didn't know. Every smile bought him time. Every handshake covered a bruise. One night, Capone met with a crooked alderman in a cigar lounge. "You want me to fix Ness?" the man asked. Capone laughed. "No, I want you to fix his budget." The alderman frowned. "You want him poor?" Capone nodded. "Starve the law. Let him chase me with a stick while I drive past in a Cadillac." The alderman grinned. "I can do that." And just like that, Ness's resources started drying up. The shift was slow but sharp. A week later, half the agents in Ness's division were reassigned. Funding for wiretaps was cut. Fuel expenses were denied. Even the coffee machine was removed from the office. Delaney kicked a chair across the room. "They're pulling our teeth." Ness sat at his desk, expression calm but tight. "They're scared," he said. "Of Capone?" "No, of me. Because if I get too close, I don't stop. And they all know I'm already close." But close wasn't enough. Capone was bleeding money in some corners, sure. A few raids, a few routes exposed, but his empire was still standing, still moving product, still feeding dozens of mouths. And now, Ness was running out of men, out of tools, out of time. That night, he drove alone to the edge of the Chicago River, parked near a row of abandoned fishing shacks. The water stank. Oil, rot, old secrets. He sat on the hood of his car, looking out, wondering what line he hadn't crossed yet. Behind him, footsteps. He didn't reach for his gun. He already knew the walk. It was Malone, an older, rougher agent, not official, not clean, but loyal. "You look like a man drowning," Malone said. "I feel like a man who forgot how to swim." Malone lit a cigar, let the smoke drift sideways. "I got a guy," he said. "Bookkeeper, Capone's, quiet type. Doesn't like attention, but he's scared." Ness turned slowly. "What's he got?" "Numbers, real ones, and names. He keeps copies. Says if Capone ever cuts him out, he'll talk." Ness stood. "Then we talk to him." Malone shook his head. "You don't ask this man for anything. You trade." "For what?" "Safety." And that's when the game really changed. Not on the street, not with bullets, but in back rooms, because Capone ran on money, not just fear. And if Ness could pull the right string, he wouldn't have to shoot the king. He could starve him. The wind over Chicago's riverfront that morning was bitter, dry, and sharp, the kind that sliced into your coat and made your bones ache. Eliot Ness stood outside an old butcher shop near the edge of Chinatown, staring up at a broken neon sign that hadn't buzzed in years. Chang's Meats. Nobody named Chang had worked there in decades. Malone stood beside him, puffing quietly on a half-burnt cigar. He wore gloves with the fingers cut off and a trench coat that looked like it had soaked in 5 different storms. His face was hard, but Ness saw something else behind his eyes today. Not fear, something closer to dread. "You sure he's in there?" Ness asked. Malone nodded. "Hasn't left since Tuesday." "And he'll talk?" "If we can promise him daylight and a new name." Ness didn't move right away. He just stood there, listening to the traffic moan behind them, the slow cough of a garbage truck down the block, the buzz of a street lamp that blinked like it was struggling to stay awake. Then he stepped forward and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was stale. No meat, no blood. Just dust, paper, and the heavy weight of secrets. A man stood behind the counter, thin, balding, with trembling hands and a worn wool sweater that didn't fit right. He didn't say anything when he saw them. He just nodded and turned around, walking toward the back. Ness followed without speaking. They ended up in a small room behind the old freezer, a converted office, shelves lined with ledgers, boxes, and a battered safe in the corner. The man sat, lit a cigarette with fingers that twitched as if they remembered something too fast, too violent. "You're him," he said. His voice was quiet, slippery. Ness didn't reply. The man pointed at Malone. He promised protection. "And you'll get it," Ness said, "if you give us something real." The man exhaled, looked down at his own hands. "I've been cooking books for Capone since 26, he said. "Didn't know who he was at first, just thought I was keeping ledgers for a liquor distributor. Then the names started showing up." Names? Judges, police, bankers, all of them on retainer, monthly envelopes, gifts. One guy got a houseboat, another got his son out of a murder charge. It's all in here. He motioned toward the safe. Ness stepped forward, heart thudding low and steady. "Unlock it." The man hesitated. "You can take the ledgers," he said, "but you leave me a copy. If I have to run, I need leverage." Ness didn't like it, but he nodded. A minute later, the safe clicked open. Inside, 2 thick black books, each one worn around the edges, pages yellowed but still intact. Ness opened the first one, his eyes scanning line after line of neatly written corruption. Bribes, payments, shipment values, routes, contacts, it was all there. He flipped to a page dated April 1928. A payment made to a federal clerk for $2,300. The same week, a major bootlegging case had mysteriously vanished from the court docket. "Jesus," Ness whispered. The bookkeeper leaned forward. "You burn me," he said, "and I'll be the one sending Capone your home address." Ness snapped the ledger shut. "We'll get you out tonight." Back at the bureau office, Ness laid the books on the table like they were sacred texts. The agents crowded around, eyes wide. Even the skeptical ones knew what this meant. Delaney whistled low. "He kept everything, every cent." Capone's own arrogance, Ness said. He wanted proof, leverage over his own men. Now we've got it. "But do we have a case?" Ness looked at the open page again. "We don't just have a case," he said. "We've got the nails for his coffin." Capone got the news within hours. Benny, the silent listener, had someone inside the bureau. Word came down quick. "The feds have the books." Capone was playing poker in the back room of the Lexington Hotel when Frankie whispered it to him. He didn't blink, didn't curse, just stared at the cards in his hand for a long second, then laid them down. "Boys," he said softly, "I need the room." The other men cleared out. Only Frankie stayed. Capone poured himself a glass of scotch, sat back, took a sip. "Books?" he asked. Frankie nodded. "Some rat gave them to Ness." Capone's jaw tensed. "How much did he get?" "We don't know. Could be everything." Capone stared ahead, silent. The fog outside was thick again, pressing against the windows like a patient killer. "Start cutting tails," he said. "Everyone. If they so much as blink wrong, we bury them." Frankie hesitated. Capone looked up. "You got a problem with that?" "No," Frankie said. "Just, it's getting sloppy out there, Al. Cops are tense, judges are nervous, one wrong move." Capone leaned forward. "One wrong move is how we ended up here. I should have burned those books. I let the worm keep them because I thought I owned his fear." He paused, finished his drink. "Turns out, he feared dying more than he feared me." That night, two things happened. One, a warehouse on the south side burned to the ground. Arson, no doubt. It was filled with shipping manifests and boxes of blank ledger paper. Two, the bookkeeper vanished. Ness found his apartment ransacked. No blood, no body, just a single envelope on the floor with a message scribbled in black ink. Numbers can vanish too. Ness sat in the dark that night, staring at that note. Delaney found him an hour later, still in his chair. "What now?" he asked. Ness didn't look up. "Now we take the books public." The press conference came 2 days later. Journalists packed into the small bureau building. Ness stood in front of a plain podium, no banners, no flag behind him, just gray walls and tired faces. He held up one ledger. "This book contains documented evidence of organized criminal activity across this city. Names, dates, payments, routes. We are building a federal case against Alphonse Capone for tax evasion, racketeering, and bribery." Flashbulbs burst like tiny thunderclaps. Ness continued, voice steady. "This fight is no longer about alcohol. It's about control. It's about law. And I promise you, we will bring him down." Afterward, Delaney leaned in. "You just painted a target on your back," Ness nodded. "Good. Now they won't miss when they come." Capone's reply was quiet. Not another fire. Not a hit. He sent a man, in a clean gray suit, face unknown, voice calm, to the bureau building with a briefcase. The guards let him through. He walked into Ness's office and set the case on the desk. "This is yours," he said. Ness stared at him. The man opened the case, stacks of bills, unmarked, crisp. $200 grand, the man said, "and another 2 if you walk away." Ness didn't speak. The man smiled. No strings, no follow-up, just disappear. Ness stood, walked around the desk, looked the man in the eye. "Tell Capone," he said. "He just bought me something." The man frowned. "What's that?" Ness leaned in close. More hate. Then he slammed the case shut and walked out of the room. Capone didn't send another message. He sent men. 1 week later, 2 federal vehicles were found riddled with bullets on the edge of West Garfield Park. 2 agents dead, a 3rd in the hospital. No arrests, no suspects. Just blood, shattered glass, and silence. Ness visited the hospital. The surviving agent, Harmon, had taken a bullet in the stomach. He was pale, eyes half open. Ness sat by his bed. "You rest," he said. Harmon coughed. "You gonna stop now?" he asked. Ness shook his head. "I can't." Harmon smiled, a weak, bloody grin. "Good. Then make him feel it." That night, Ness stood by his office window again. Rain slicked the glass, streaked the light from passing cars. His reflection looked older than it should have. Delaney walked in with 2 files. "Judge Hanley just signed off. We've got a warrant. We're going after Capone's accountant, the big one." Ness turned slowly. "And if we get him, this whole thing unravels." Ness didn't speak. Because he knew. Now it was all or nothing. They called him Numbers Mike. Nobody really knew where he came from. No birth certificate, no military record. Just appeared one day in the basement of the Metropolitan Bank in 1923 with a fresh suit and a sharper mind. Didn't talk much, didn't drink, didn't smoke. But he could balance 12 separate ledgers in his head and spot a forgery by the weight of the ink. Capone found him through a union boss who owed too many favors. The boss didn't survive long after the introduction, but Mike did, and that alone said everything. Now, he was the most dangerous man in Capone's empire, not because he carried a gun, but because he knew where every dollar came from, where every bribe went, and who had blood on their name. Eliot Ness knew if he could get to Mike, not just lean on him, but truly break through that cold accountant shell, he could choke Capone's operation until it died wheezing. But getting close was another matter. Mike never left his apartment unless Capone called for him. No clubs, no late-night dinners, no women. He was guarded like a high priest. 2 men on the stairwell, 1 outside the building, 1 inside. The kind of quiet protection money could buy when you knew too much to be let loose. Ness stood across the street that night, coat pulled tight against the October wind, watching the windows above. He knew which one was Mike's. The curtains never moved. The light never flickered. Still, controlled, like the man himself. Delaney joined him, handing him a folded paper from his coat pocket. "Bank logs," he said. "We got him from a postal employee who didn't like the way Capone's men handled his sister." Ness scanned the page. 6 deposits, all round figures, all made within minutes of each other. "He's laundering it too clean," Ness muttered. "Cleaner than a nun's conscience," Delaney replied. They stood quietly for a moment. "Can't lean on him through fear," Ness finally said. "He doesn't care if Capone kills him." "So what do we do?" Ness looked up at the dark window again. "We make him care about something else." Capone, meanwhile, was watching his empire stretch at the seams. He knew Ness had something. Maybe not everything, but enough to make certain men nervous, and nervous men were dangerous. He paced his office at the Lexington, slow but steady. The air smelled of tobacco and leather, the kind of old, rich scent that sank into the wallpaper over time. The windows were fogged, not from the weather, from pressure. Joey leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Judge Hanley's starting to pull back," he said. Capone stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" "Canceled 2 meetings this week. Didn't show up to the restaurant last night. No message, just nothing." Capone nodded slowly. "He's scared." Joey didn't answer. Capone walked to his desk, opened the drawer, pulled out a thick envelope. "Drop this off at his house," he said. "Hand it to him directly. No go-betweens. No mail." Joey hesitated. "And if he doesn't take it?" Capone looked up. "Then we remind him who paid his mortgage, who buried that dead nephew of his in 27, who kept his wife's drinking problem off the front page." Joey took the envelope. "I'll remind him." The next morning, Ness met with a woman named Rita Malloy, 32 years old. Former stenographer at the Western District Courthouse, sharp tongue, even sharper memory. Fired 6 months ago for insubordination. Ness knew the truth. She had slapped a judge across the face after he made a comment about her legs in front of 6 clerks. Ness liked her immediately. "I need a favor," he said, laying down a file in front of her. Rita flipped through it. Photographs, bank slips, a name circled in red, Michael Friedman, a.k.a. Numbers Mike. "He won't talk," Ness said, "but I think he might listen." She raised an eyebrow. "To me?" "He used to sign into the county clerk's office once a month 2 years ago. You were the one at the window, right?" Rita leaned back in the chair, thinking, then nodded slowly. "Gray suit?" "Clean hands, always exact change." That's him. What makes you think he remembers me? Ness smiled slightly. Because men like him never forget the small details. And because you're the only person in that courthouse who wasn't afraid to look people in the eye. Rita didn't smile back. What do you want me to say to him? Nothing? She blinked. Just deliver this, he said, handing her a small sealed envelope. And if he doesn't open it, he will. That night, Rita Malloy walked up the stairwell to Mike's apartment like it was any other Tuesday. She wore a modest coat, no makeup, hair tied back, no attempt to seduce or manipulate, just a quiet woman delivering a quiet message. The guard at the bottom tried to stop her. She handed him a slip, court transfer request forged by Ness himself. The guard scanned it, confused, but let her go. It looked real. That was the key. When Mike opened the door, he didn't react, just stared at her as if measuring whether this was a dream or a threat. She handed him the envelope. He took it with a gloved hand, read the front. You were never invisible. E.N. He didn't invite her in, didn't speak, just closed the door. But later that night, he sat at his desk, staring at the note over and over again, because for a man who made a living hiding in the margins, it shook him to realize someone had been watching him all along. Meanwhile, Capone was beginning to suspect something far worse than a mole. A shift. Judges weren't answering his calls. The cash drops weren't buying the same silence. One of his trusted lieutenants, Carmine, disappeared. No trace, no body, just gone. The fear wasn't in the loss. Capone had lost men before. The fear was in the silence. Frankie stood in front of him now, reading off a short report. They pulled more customs files. Everything coming in through Lake Michigan is under watch. Capone rubbed his forehead. I need a win. Something that reminds them who runs this town. Frankie hesitated. We could take another agent off the board. Capone shook his head. No more hits, not right now. I need something clean, legal, public. He thought for a long while, then snapped his fingers. Get me Judge Hanley. If he wants to run scared, I'll give him a reason to run faster. The next day, the front page of the Chicago Tribune ran a headline that stopped half the city in its tracks. Federal Judge Hanley faces bribery inquiry. No picture, just a name. And that was enough. It wasn't Ness who leaked it. He never even touched the case. But Capone knew what it would do. Stir the pot, scare the bench, remind everyone that if Ness was willing to go after Hanley, then nobody was safe. And it worked. The following week, 2 court subpoenas mysteriously disappeared. A city clerk went on extended leave. One banker moved his family to St. Louis overnight. The chessboard shifted again. Ness gritted his teeth as the pieces moved. Capone didn't just play the game. He changed it when he needed to, but something else was changing too. That night, a small envelope arrived at Ness's apartment. No return address, no name. Inside, a bank slip, a signature. Michael Friedman. Underneath it, a handwritten note. You were right. I do remember her. Meet me Thursday night, 9 p.m. Union Station, Platform 3. Ness folded the note, locked it in his drawer, then sat down and smiled. Not because it was over, but because for the first time, Capone had something to lose. The wind at Union Station that night was sharp and mean, the kind of wind that didn't just blow, it whispered. It moved through the iron beams and under the benches, picking up cigarette butts and secrets, scattering them through the dark. Eliot Ness stood on Platform 3, gloved hands in his coat pockets, collar turned up. He'd arrived early, an hour before the Times scribbled on the note, because that's how you stayed alive in Chicago. You got there first and you watched everything. The platform was mostly empty. A few travelers waiting on the last outbound train to Peoria, an old man with a hat over his eyes, a couple speaking too quietly to understand. Everything felt slow, suspended, like time was holding its breath. Ness kept his eyes on the far entrance. At exactly 8:59, Michael Friedman stepped out of the shadows. He looked just as Ness remembered from the bureau photos. Tall, pale, clean suit, shoes shined to mirror finish. He walked without urgency, like a man who still believed he had control. But his eyes, They told a different story. There was no sharpness in them anymore, no arrogance, just calculation, and something even deeper, the quiet look of a man who'd seen too much and kept too much inside. Ness didn't move as Mike approached, didn't speak. They stood about 6 feet apart. Mike glanced around once, then back at Ness. "You came alone," he said. Ness nodded. "I don't trust men who bring company to private conversations." Mike smiled slightly, just for a moment. "Then maybe we understand each other." Another gust of wind curled between them. "You asked for this meeting," Ness said. "I did. Why?" Mike looked past Ness toward the far end of the track, where an empty freight car sat idle, rust flaking off its edge. "Because I'm tired," he said. Ness watched him closely. "You're the safest man in Capone's operation." Mike laughed, short, hollow. "There's no such thing as safe, not in this city, not when you know what I know." "What do you know?" Mike turned back to face him. "I know where the real books are." That hung in the air like gun smoke. Ness stepped closer, just a little. "Not the copies?" "No," Mike said. "The ones nobody has touched, not even Capone. He thinks I burned them 3 years ago. I didn't." "Why?" "Because I'm not stupid." Mike paused. "Capone's empire is built on fire. But fire spreads. One day it'll reach him. I needed something to survive when it did." Ness didn't speak. He waited. Mike reached into his coat slowly, no sudden moves, and pulled out a small folded paper. He handed it to Ness. "A storage unit," he said, "West Side, under the name Franklin Cord. Locker 112, 2 ledgers, locked in a steel box welded shut." Ness took the paper, didn't unfold it yet. "Why now?" he asked. Mike looked tired. Not the kind of tired that goes away with sleep, the kind that settles into your bones. "Because I watched what he did to that girl." Ness frowned. "What girl?" Mike looked him straight in the eye. 15, worked at the bakery on 45th. Her brother owed Capone's men money. She didn't. But they used her anyway, just to send a message. His voice caught just slightly. "I saw her picture in the paper. Closed casket. And I realized I was helping bury people like her." He exhaled, stepped back. "I'm not doing it anymore." Ness nodded once. "I'll protect you." Mike laughed again, this time with a bit more life. "You can try." Then he turned, walked back into the shadows. And Ness stood there, holding the paper like it weighed more than anything he'd ever carried. By morning, Ness had the storage unit surrounded, 2 federal cars parked out front, a locksmith with a permit, 2 plainclothes agents at the gate. Delaney stood beside him, staring at the lock on Unit 112 like it might explode. "You really think it's in there?" he asked. "I think this ends it," Ness replied. The locksmith got it open after a few minutes. The hinges groaned. Inside, a steel chest, not flashy, just solid, industrial, heavy. Ness stepped forward, cracked it open with a crowbar, and there they were. 2 thick ledgers, no titles, no markings, but Ness knew. The moment he flipped the first page, he knew. Not just payments, not just bribes, names, dates, personal accounts, code numbers tied to offshore bank transfers, statements from clients in city government, police stations, and federal offices. It was like staring into the city's soul and finding it soaked in blood. Delaney let out a low whistle. "We're going to need more subpoenas." Ness didn't respond. He already knew what came next. Capone was playing billiards when Frankie brought the news. Wordlessly, he placed a folded note on the table. Capone finished his shot, didn't rush it, and straightened up. He read the note once, then read it again, then sat down slowly in the leather chair by the fireplace. Frankie stood there, hands folded. Capone didn't speak for a while. Finally, he asked, "Do we know who gave it to him?" Frankie hesitated. "We think it was Mike." Capone looked into the fire. "I should have buried that coward 2 years ago," he said. "You want me to find him?" "No," Capone said. "If he's still breathing, Ness already has him in a box somewhere. No use wasting men." He picked up a glass of bourbon, took a sip. It burned more than usual. "They're going to indict me," he said. "Then we get a judge in our pocket," Frankie offered. Capone didn't answer right away. "No," he said softly. "We buy time. We drag it out. We use the streets. If they want a war, we give it to them. I want chaos in the city. Let 'em feel the heat." Frankie nodded and turned to leave, but Capone called out to him. "Frankie?" "Yeah?" Capone's eyes narrowed. "If we fall, we take half of Chicago with us." Ness didn't celebrate, even when the indictment was finalized, even when the U.S. attorney confirmed that Capone would be charged with 22 counts of tax evasion and 5 of conspiracy. Even when the papers ran the headline, "Al Capone to face trial in federal court," he just sat in his office, papers piled around him, ledger still open beside his typewriter. Delaney walked in, holding 2 black coffees. "Biggest bust in city history, and you look like someone stole your dog." Ness gave a tired smile. "We're not done yet. He's going down." "Maybe," Ness said. "But men like him don't die easy. Even if the court takes him, the city might not let him go." Delaney frowned. "You think he's got something left?" "I think when rats are cornered, they bite harder." And Ness was right. Because the very next day, 5 federal witnesses vanished. 3 were found by the river, their hands tied, throats slit. 1 was never found. The 5th showed up drunk and shaking, unwilling to testify. Capone wasn't trying to hide anymore. He was sending a message, and Ness got it. But it didn't stop him. It only made him colder. He called a late meeting that night, only 3 agents in the room. He pulled out a map, pinned it to the wall, marked every known safe house, meeting spot, and warehouse still under Capone's reach. "We raid them all," he said, "one by one, quiet. No press, no glory, just pressure." Delaney raised a brow. "And if they shoot?" Ness looked at him. "Then we shoot back." There are certain nights when a city holds its breath, not because of a storm, not because of sirens, but because something unspoken is about to happen. Chicago, October 9th, 1931. That was one of those nights. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the streets were still wet, reflecting street lamps like pools of rusted glass. Steam rose from grates and gutters. The air tasted like metal. The wind carried whispers, rumors of raids, bribes, executions, men gone missing without a trace. Eliot Ness stood in the hallway of a crumbling apartment on Wells Street, just outside Unit 3D. Behind the door was Vito Scalza, one of Capone's transportation men, the guy who made sure the booze moved through the train yards without touching the official logs. Vito wasn't a killer. He didn't carry a gun, but he had access, the kind that could unravel the last stretch of Capone's empire. Ness knocked once. Inside, footsteps approached, then silence. A second knock. Vito's voice came through the door, low and nervous. "Who is it?" Ness didn't answer. He just slipped his badge through the crack under the door. A beat passed, then the bolt clicked, and the door opened. Vito stood there, eyes sunken, skin pale. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Ness stepped inside. Delaney and Agent Harmon followed, both wearing plain clothes and serious faces. Vito closed the door behind them, locked it, then pulled the blinds shut. "You got 5 minutes," he said. "After that, I don't want to know you." Ness nodded. "We need the ledgers you used on the train runs, the off-books manifests, the red slips." Vito shook his head. "Those were burned 2 years ago." "No," Ness said. "You burned the copies, not the originals. Guys like you don't erase insurance, they hide it." Vito didn't answer, but his silence said enough. Ness stepped closer, voice steady. "You want out of this with your life? You give me the originals. We'll relocate you, give you a new name, somewhere warm." Vito let out a bitter laugh. "You think Capone don't have warm places too?" "We're not offering warmth," Ness replied. "We're offering silence. He can't kill what he can't find." That made Vito pause. He walked over to a chest under the bed, opened it, and pulled out a small metal cash box. He unlocked it with a key from around his neck. Inside were 3 red-bound notebooks, worn but intact. He held them out. "You didn't get these from me," he said. "You don't exist anymore," Ness replied. That same night, 3 blocks away, a young man named Jimmy Coletta was shot 6 times behind a cigar lounge near Little Italy. Witnesses claimed he was meeting someone, a name nobody wanted to say aloud. He wasn't part of Capone's crew. He was trying to be. But ambition got you killed just as fast as betrayal. Frankie stood over Jimmy's body when the police arrived. He didn't flinch at the blood or the stench. He lit a cigarette while the patrolmen shuffled around, pretending to write things down. One of them asked, "You want this cleaned up quick?" Frankie nodded. "Burn the report. He was never here." And like that, another dead man vanished beneath the smoke. Capone didn't come down that night. He stayed at the Lexington, reading through wiretap transcripts brought in by one of his legal men. Ness's face came up 3 times, once near the docks, once at a courthouse, once at the Federal Archives. "He's building something," Capone muttered. "Yeah," the lawyer said, "and it's getting louder." Capone closed the file. "Then maybe it's time we bring the noise." 2 nights later, Ness ran his first covert sweep. No sirens, no warrants, just 5 cars, 3 agents per car, moving through the old brewery tunnels under Roosevelt Road. Word was Capone was using them again, smuggling in crates from Windsor through a string of abandoned drainage routes. The tunnels were black, not dark, black. Even with lanterns and flashlights, it felt like the walls swallowed the light. They walked in pairs, boots echoing, guns ready. Ness was up front with Harmon, who kept a sawed-off shotgun in hand. "Why do I feel like we're walking into a graveyard?" Harmon muttered. "Because we are," Ness said. They found the crates after 15 minutes, stacked against the far wall, covered in old tarp. Canadian whiskey, hundreds of bottles. Delaney opened a box, checked the labels, marked to a fake importer in Detroit. "This is clean," he said. "Untouched." Ness nodded. "Not anymore." They smashed every bottle, every box. It took over an hour. Glass, wood, liquor, all broken, poured, trashed. Then they set the crates on fire. The flames licked the tunnel walls, lighting up the carved bricks and the old graffiti like a church full of devils. As they walked back, the fire behind them, Ness felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory, not pride, control. But control in a city like Chicago never lasts long, because the next morning, a bomb went off in front of a city official's house. No one was killed, but the message was clear. Nothing is off limits now. Capone's crew didn't admit it. They didn't have to. The city knew. The streets whispered it like a hymn. He's fighting back. And Ness knew, once again, bodies would follow. 3 days later, a cop named Reuben Dills was found dead in an alley near Grant Park, shot in the back of the head. He'd been talking to federal investigators about shipping routes through the Great Lakes. Capone left no witnesses anymore. And Ness? He was getting closer, but the cost was rising. Delaney dropped a folder on his desk the next morning. Photos of the body, autopsy, a note from the coroner. Execution style, clean, no hesitation. Ness flipped through the pages. "He had a daughter," he said quietly. "Yeah," Delaney replied, 9 years old. They didn't say anything else, just let the silence fill the space where anger lived. That night, Ness didn't go home. He walked the riverbank alone, coat pulled tight, badge tucked deep in his coat, a cigarette burning slow between his fingers. He looked out at the water, black and slow-moving, and asked himself the one question he never said out loud. How many more before he falls? The wind didn't answer, but deep down, he already knew. Too many. Back in the Lexington, Capone was feeling the pressure too, not from the law, from the silence. The calls weren't coming in like before. Judges were stalling, cops weren't picking up. Business was slowing, and worse, loyalty was cracking. Frankie stood by the window looking out. "They're scared," he said. Capone leaned against the desk. "They should be." "No," Frankie said, "not of you, of him." Capone looked up, face hard. "Then we remind them." He poured a drink, took one long sip. "Let's give him a funeral." Frankie raised an eyebrow. "Whose?" Capone smiled. "I don't care. Make it loud." The funeral came 3 days later. It wasn't for a judge or a cop or some banker who made too much money and lost his soul along the way. It was for Agent Harmon. Capone didn't know his name. Ness did. They'd served together since the beginning. Raids, files, dry stakeouts, nights where the cold cut through your bones. and the only thing keeping you going was knowing the man beside you would go just as far, just as hard. He'd been killed in his apartment. 2 shots, close range, through the neck, nothing stolen, no signs of a break-in. The door was unlocked. That meant Harmon knew the man who killed him. The Bureau called it an internal matter. Ness knew better. It was a message. They buried Harmon on a gray Friday. Light rain, thin crowd, no music. Just a preacher reading from a page that trembled in the wind, and a widow who didn't cry, because some women ran out of tears long before the coffin closed. Ness stood at the back, hat in hand, jaw locked. Delaney stood beside him, silent. After the service, they didn't speak for a while. Finally, Delaney muttered, "Capone's getting desperate." "No," Ness said, voice hard. "He's getting personal." Delaney turned to him. "You want to hit back?" Ness didn't answer at first, then, "Not with bullets." That night, Ness ordered the biggest coordinated operation of his career. 5 teams, 10 agents, 3 nights of non-stop raids, every known liquor storage facility in Pilsen, back of the yards, and the lower South Side. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't clean. It was war. The first night, they hit a brewery hidden under a meatpacking warehouse. 40 barrels of imported scotch, illegal employees, forged custom sheets. 2 guards tried to run. They didn't make it far. The second night, they raided a butcher shop front, found a basement stacked with moonshine crates and 20 Thompson submachine guns stashed in boxes marked pork fat. The third night, they hit the river warehouses, boats, logs, payments. Delaney found a box full of ledgers marked with initials, some of them tied to federal names. When he showed one to Ness, the room went cold. "This one's a congressman," Delaney said. "Keep it," Ness muttered. "We'll use it later." But with every strike, Capone struck back. The day after the river raid, a federal car exploded outside the courthouse. No agents inside. It was a warning. Next, the office's front windows were shattered overnight. No notes, no prints, just a mess of glass and silence. Ness started carrying a second revolver. His agents stopped driving the same route twice. The war wasn't in the alleys anymore. It had come inside. In the Lexington Hotel, Capone's world was cracking. Frankie sat across from him with a new report. "We lost the 45th Street lot. Ness swept it last night." Capone ran a hand through his hair, slow and frustrated. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. His eyes were darker now, sunken and twitching at the edges like sleep hadn't visited in weeks. "That's 4 spots in 7 days," Frankie continued. "We're bleeding." Capone said nothing, just stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that used to kneel for him. Now it stared back, distant and indifferent. "I gave this place everything," he muttered. Frankie said nothing. Capone turned, voice sharp. "You think he wins?" Frankie's jaw tensed. "If he does, it's because we let him." Capone smiled, thin, crooked. "Good answer?" He poured 2 glasses of bourbon, handed one to Frankie, then stared out the window again. "I used to run this city with whispers," he said. "Now I have to scream to be heard." Meanwhile, Ness was breaking apart piece by piece. He didn't sleep more than 2 hours a night, 8 when he remembered, smoked too much, drank too little, and carried the weight of every man buried in the name of justice. Rita Malloy showed up at his office one night, uninvited. She wore a dark coat and a look that didn't flinch. "You're killing yourself," she said. Ness didn't look up from the files. "Then I'll die clean." "You think any of this is clean?" she snapped. "You're drowning in filth. Capone's is just the deeper end." He looked at her. Tired eyes, hollow stare. "I don't have time to argue." Rita walked over, grabbed the cigarette from his fingers and crushed it. "Then shut up and let someone help." That night, they sat on the roof, looking down at the sleeping city. Rita passed him a flask. He took a sip, stronger than he expected. They didn't talk about the dead. They didn't talk about Capone. They just sat. And for once, the silence wasn't heavy. It was kind. The next morning, Ness received a letter. No return address, just his name typed on the front. Inside, a photo of his apartment building, his window circled in red, and a single sentence typed on a card. "You're not untouchable." He stared at it for a long time. then burned it in his ashtray. Later that day, Ness met with the U.S. attorney and pushed for early trial proceedings. "I want Capone in front of a jury by the end of the year," he said. The attorney shook his head. "Not possible." Ness leaned forward. "Then make it possible." The attorney sighed. "You've stirred enough already." "I haven't even started." Meanwhile, Capone was down to 2 safe houses. The rest were either raided, burned, or compromised. His own men started looking at him differently, not with fear but calculation, like they were waiting to see which way the wind would blow before they decided whether to stay or run. One of them, Tony Rizzo, approached Frankie in private. "Thinking maybe it's time to disappear," Tony said. "South America. Heard it's nice." Frankie stared at him a moment. "You tell Al that?" Tony shook his head. "No, I ain't stupid." Frankie nodded. "Good." Then shot him in the chest twice, left him in the alley. Later, Capone didn't even ask who it was. He just said, "Burn the body." That night, Ness got another tip, a weapons cache on the edge of Chinatown. He didn't wait for backup, just took Delaney and 2 men, armed to the teeth, and hid it fast. Inside the warehouse, grenades, machine guns, crates of ammunition, and a dead man tied to a chair. Beaten, burned, bullet in the forehead. On the wall behind him, painted in blood. "You can't stop what you can't see." Delaney stared at the message. "Is this a threat?" "No," Ness said. "It's desperation." That same week, the government froze 6 of Capone's bank accounts. Legal pressure, quiet moves. Capone felt it. He couldn't move money, couldn't pay the right people fast enough, and that's when the rat started running. 2 more of his men disappeared. One turned up in Kansas, already talking to federal marshals. Another was shot dead in front of a brothel, left with a note pinned to his chest. "Loyalty lasts longer than life." Ness sat in his office, stacks of files surrounding him, map full of pins on the wall. Every inch of Capone's world, mapped, labeled, choking. Delaney walked in with 2 cups of coffee. "We just got a call," he said. "From the courthouse." Ness looked up. "They set a date," Delaney smiled. "February 17th. He's going to trial." Ness exhaled. Long, steady, heavy. "Good," he said. "Now let's make sure he arrives in handcuffs." By late January, the snow began to fall without stopping. It wasn't the romantic kind, not white and soft like postcards or those cheap city calendars. This snow came down dirty, thick, wet. The kind that stuck to boots and made the whole city feel like it was rotting from the ground up. Chicago didn't move much in that weather, but Al Capone did. He was riding in the back of a black Packard, eyes darting to every corner, every alley, every face on every sidewalk. The car heater was broken. His coat was thick. Still, the cold clawed its way in through the seams like the past was trying to get inside. Frankie sat beside him, gloved hands resting on his lap, pistol tucked into his belt under his coat. They didn't speak for most of the ride. Finally, Capone broke the silence. "You ever wonder how it ends?" he asked. Frankie looked over. "All the time." Capone gave a crooked smile. "You think we get to die in our beds?" "No," Frankie said flatly. Capone chuckled, dry. "At least you're honest." The car pulled to a stop outside a red brick building with boarded windows. It looked like nothing, like the kind of place a man disappeared from without a trace. It was one of the last warehouses they had left. Inside, 6 men sat at a long table. The air smelled like sweat, whiskey, and gasoline. A space heater coughed in the corner. Capone stepped in and shut the door behind him. Everything went still. They all stood. He raised a hand. "Sit," he said. "Let's talk." And they did. Quiet. Careful. Because the dawn was no longer invincible, and when power bleeds, even friends start thinking like wolves. Across town, Ness stood in front of the full board, a wall covered in photographs, documents, scribbled notes, and red string connecting pins like spider legs. It looked chaotic. But Ness understood every inch of it. He could walk a finger from the docks to the judge's chambers, through 10 years of hidden handshakes and backroom whispers. Delaney came in, arms full of files. 5 more witnesses confirmed. They'll testify. Ness nodded. He didn't look away from the board. And the last accountant? Safe. We moved him upstate under a false name. He's ready for trial. Ness rubbed his face with one hand. The stubble on his jaw scratched his palm. He hadn't shaved in days, hadn't cared. Sleep had stopped showing up. He didn't chase it anymore. You okay? Delaney asked. Ness didn't answer, because okay was something other people got to be. That evening, Ness met Rita again, this time at a small diner that stayed open past midnight. She slid into the booth across from him, her coat dusted with snow, scarf wrapped tight. You look like you've aged 10 years, she said. I feel like I've been buried in ice, Ness replied, sipping his coffee. Rita watched him for a moment. You know what scares me? He looked up. That if Capone doesn't kill you, this job will. Ness didn't argue. She leaned forward. You need to decide what's left of you when this is over. He blinked slowly. What if nothing's left? She reached across the table and touched his hand. Then let someone help carry the weight. The trial was set for February 17th, but Capone's lawyers were already pulling strings behind the scenes. They filed paperwork to delay, pushed for changes in venue, challenged witness credibility, and worked every name still left in their pocket. In the Lexington, Capone sat at his desk reading legal memos he barely understood. They're gonna bury me in numbers, he said. Frankie lit a cigarette and leaned against the wall. We still got options. Not many, Capone said, but enough. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. I used to run the city with a nod. Now I need permission just to breathe. Frankie stepped closer. Then maybe it's time to remind them who you are. Capone stared at him. What are you suggesting? Frankie held up a folder. Inside, names, jurors, people who might be seated for the trial. Capone didn't speak, just tapped his finger against the edge of the folder. Tap, tap, tap. Then, start soft. Warnings, visits, no blood, not yet. Ness got wind of it within 2 days. One juror reported being followed. Another's husband found a knife stuck in his truck tire, with a card on the windshield that read, Your wife's job puts your kids at risk. Ness stood at the edge of the jury office, jaw clenched so tight he hadn't noticed he was grinding his teeth. They're coming for the trial now, Delaney said. They're scared, Ness replied. Yeah, but scared people do stupid things. Ness turned away. Then let's be smarter. He met with a federal judge that night. I want the jury changed the last minute, Ness said. No announcement, no leaks. We pull names on trial morning. The judge frowned. That's not protocol. Neither is threatening a man's family, Ness said. But Capone's not following rules. The judge leaned back in his chair. Do it, he said. Capone's final days of freedom didn't feel like freedom at all. He ate alone more often now. His crew grew quieter. He'd look across the table at men he'd known for a decade and wonder who would flip first, who was already whispering, who would sell him for a lighter sentence or a clean passport. Frankie stood by him through it all, silent, loyal, but even Frankie was starting to twitch at the edges. A lot of guys talking, he said one night. Capone sat on the edge of his bed, tie half done, staring at the carpet. Let them talk, he said. What if they run? Capone looked up, face colder than the winter outside. Then we hunt them. Even if I'm gone, even if I'm rotting in a cell, we hunt them until their grandkids feel it. Frankie nodded, but his eyes were tired too. The night before the trial, Ness walked the empty halls of the Bureau building. Everyone else had gone home. Only he remained, ghost among ghosts. He stood in front of the board, stared at every name, every photo, every red line, every bloodstain that never made the reports. Then, he pulled down the board, piece by piece. It wasn't a moment of victory, it was grief and relief, and the knowledge that tomorrow, maybe, just maybe, it would mean something. February 17th, 1931. The courthouse was surrounded by officers, federal agents, and reporters packed shoulder to shoulder, shouting questions that nobody answered. Inside, Alphonse Gabriel Capone, sat in a dark gray suit, shoulders broad, face smooth, hands folded in front of him like he was waiting for a train, not a verdict. Ness sat in the gallery, not at the table, not in the front, just behind, watching, breathing, listening. The jury was new, quiet, chosen that morning, no names released. Capone looked at them and knew. The game had changed again. The trial began. Opening statements, paperwork, books, witnesses. Capone didn't speak, didn't blink. His lawyers tried to spin, tried to minimize, called it bookkeeping errors, accidental gaps, misunderstood documents. But Ness had built it too well. And the truth didn't flinch. Day 5. A key witness stepped down. Ness knew him only as Joseph T., a mid-level cashier who helped wash Capone's money through 3 fronts. Nervous, pale, but steady. When he pointed at Capone and said, "That's the man I took orders from," the room didn't breathe. Capone didn't react. But Frankie, sitting behind him, shifted in his seat. Just a little. Day 9. The jury left to deliberate. Capone was led out quietly, no cuffs, just guards on either side. Ness stepped outside, into the cold, into the light of 1,000 flashbulbs, and for the first time in months, he exhaled. Not because it was over, but because he had given everything, every damn part of himself, to this. And now, it was up to the jury. He couldn't fight anymore. He could only wait. Day 10. The verdict came. Guilty, not of murder, not of racketeering, but of tax evasion. 11 years in federal prison. Capone blinked once, then nodded. Ness stood in the back of the courtroom and didn't move. Later in the hallway, a reporter shoved a microphone toward him. "Agent Ness, how do you feel? You finally got him." Ness looked past the cameras, past the crowd, past everything, then said quietly, "No one ever gets away with everything," and walked away. That night, as Capone sat in his cell, staring at a concrete wall in silence, and Ness sat in his empty office, the board gone, the map stripped clean. The city finally slept. Not peaceful, not healed, but quiet. For now. March 1931. The city didn't celebrate. There were no parades, no champagne in the streets, no headlines that lasted longer than a day. After the trial, Chicago returned to its old rhythm like a dog shaking off rain. The people went back to work. The police went back to pretending, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the gunfire it replaced. In the back pages of the Tribune, a short paragraph reported that Al Capone had been transferred to Cook County Jail and would be moved to a federal penitentiary within weeks. He didn't cry in court, didn't scream, didn't beg. He nodded once, stood, and left. Just like that. In his small concrete cell, Capone sat on the edge of a thin cot, staring at the gray wall across from him. The cell stank of piss and bleach. His shoes were gone. His suit had been replaced with a dull uniform 2 sizes too big. The power he once wore like cologne was stripped at the door. He hadn't said a word to anyone since arriving. The guards didn't know what to make of it. They expected fire, maybe rage or threats. But all they got was silence. Capone knew better. You didn't roar when you were cornered. You waited. Because maybe, just maybe, the corner would move. Back at the bureau, Eliot Ness was walking through his office like a stranger. The bulletin board was bare. The map was rolled up in a tube in the corner. The room smelled of stale paper and something else he couldn't place. Maybe old sweat, maybe a ghost. Delaney was packing up a drawer. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. Ness nodded. "There's nothing left here for me." "You could run the department." "I already did." Delaney paused, then pulled out a small envelope. "This came in this morning. No return." Ness took it, opened it carefully. Inside was a torn photograph of him, standing outside the courthouse on the day of the verdict. On the back, written in shaky cursive, "You don't forget a war just because it ends." Ness folded it in half, slid it into his coat, and said nothing. That night, Rita found him at his apartment. He was sitting on the windowsill, looking out at the street, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, cigarette burning low in his hand. She leaned against the doorframe. Thought I'd find you here." He didn't turn. "Why?" "Because this is what ghosts do. They haunt." He smirked. "I thought we killed the ghost." "You did," she said. "But it was inside you, too." He looked at her finally. And there it was. The truth behind the quiet. He hadn't won. He'd just survived. Across the city, in smoke-filled back rooms and dim-lit bars, people started rewriting the story. They said Capone let it happen, that he allowed the trial to go through to protect the rest of his network, that Ness had only caught the tail, not the head. Others said Capone's fall didn't matter, that someone else would rise, someone meaner, smarter, less visible. Some even whispered that Ness was just a face, a tool used by the feds for show, that the real work happened somewhere else, by men whose names no one remembered. Ness didn't respond. He let them talk, let them rewrite. Because truth in a city like Chicago didn't live in newspapers or courtrooms. It lived in scars. April 1931. Al Capone was transferred to the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta. The press was locked out. No photos, no interviews. He rode the prison train like any other man, shackled, silent, escorted by men who didn't care who he used to be. When he stepped off at the yard, he looked up at the gray sky and smirked. One of the guards asked, "What's funny?" Capone replied, "I've stayed in worse places." He didn't lie. His past was full of basements and beatings, nights spent hiding in swamps with a gun on his chest and fear crawling through his gut. This wasn't new, but time was new. He could feel it in his hands, the shake in his fingers, the way his knees ached when he stood too fast, the quiet pressure behind his eyes. Prison didn't scare him. Decay did. Inside, he kept to himself, didn't cause trouble, didn't talk much. But he watched. He watched everything. Who paid for food, who got extra, who traded protection for silence. He understood systems better than most men, and prison had one too. But this system was harder to buy, and every day his name meant a little less. Ness spent that same month in Washington. They'd offered him a new job, director of public safety in a nearby city. More money, bigger office, less bullets. He said no. He wasn't made for desks anymore. Instead, he moved back into a small apartment near the lake, took late walks, drank too much coffee, and listened to the radio like it might give him answers. One night, he received another envelope. No postmark, just slipped under his door. Inside, a photo of Capone in a prison yard. On the back, he still smiles. Ness tossed it in the fire and sat in the dark, letting the heat kiss his face. The city moved on. It always did. A new bootlegger filled the gaps Capone left behind. A new judge started taking bribes in quieter ways. The cops went back to looking the other way. And the people just kept working, eating, surviving. But something had changed. There was a space now. A silence where the noise used to be. A cold where the fire once lived. May 1931. Capone collapsed in the prison infirmary. They said it was stress, or maybe the early signs of neurosyphilis, the disease that had been eating at him in the shadows for years. His mind started slipping. He forgot names, lost time, asked for people who'd been dead for a decade. The guards noticed first. He'd talk to himself at night, mutter numbers, whisper names. Once he was found in the corner of his cell, rocking slowly, saying the same word over and over again. Untouchable. Untouchable. He still smiled, though. That crooked, tired, impossible grin. Like he knew something the world didn't. Back in Chicago, Ness visited Harmon's grave. He brought no flowers, no speech. Just stood there in the wind, thinking about the cost, thinking about what was still to come. And when he left, he whispered 3 words. "I remember you." Then walked away. June 1931. Al Capone forgot his name. It happened one night after lights out. A guard walked past his cell, heard mumbling, and paused. Capone was sitting on the edge of the cot, hands folded in his lap like a man praying, his lips moving without sound. The guard stepped closer. "What was that?" he asked. Capone didn't look up. "Where's my mother?" he asked quietly. The guard hesitated. "She's not here, Al." Capone frowned. "Why not?" And that's when it hit the guard. Capone's eyes, they were glassy, wide, but vacant, like he was looking through the walls. "I think I'm lost," Capone whispered. He wasn't faking. The doctors ran their tests. The diagnosis was clear: neurosyphilis, advanced, irreversible. The disease that had started in his blood was now devouring his brain. His body was still strong, mostly, but his mind? That was slipping faster every week. Some days he remembered names. Other days he'd call the warden Papa and ask for toys. One afternoon, he was caught humming a lullaby and crying at the same time. The guards didn't know what to do. This wasn't the man they'd feared. This wasn't the king of Chicago. This was a broken boy in a grown man's skin. And yet, even in that haze, even with the fog climbing through his thoughts, Capone clung to a few things. Money. He still asked about his bank accounts, still told guards about plans he had for when he got out. "Tell Frankie we're going to start over," he said once. "Out west. I'll buy us a vineyard." The guard just nodded, knowing Frankie had vanished 2 months after the trial. Rumors said he was buried in Nevada. Other rumors said he was never buried at all. Back in Chicago, Ness read about Capone's condition in a newspaper column. It was buried beneath headlines about factory strikes and the stock market downturn. A small box of text. Capone's health declines. Sources report mental instability. Possible transfer to medical facility. Ness sat at his kitchen table, the newspaper spread open. Black coffee in front of him. The window was cracked open. Wind blew against the curtains. Everything felt slow, still. He folded the paper, lit a cigarette, didn't say a word. Because what was there to say? You chase a monster your whole life. You burn parts of yourself to bring him down. And then, in the end, the monster rots from the inside, like spoiled meat. No trial can give you that kind of ending. No victory can make it feel worth it. Later that week, Rita visited. They sat on a bench near the lake, watching gulls circle over the water. "You heard about Capone?" she asked. "Yeah," Ness replied. "He's not even there anymore, just slipping." Ness didn't answer. Rita turned to him. "How do you feel?" He exhaled slowly, like I didn't expect it to end with a whimper. "Did you want him dead?" Ness looked out over the lake. "I don't know what I wanted. Maybe just for him to know he lost." "You think he knows that?" "No." Rita nodded. They sat in silence for a while, and Ness realized something he hadn't wanted to admit. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just tired. At the penitentiary, Capone's cell was now marked medical priority. A nurse visited twice daily. He was fed softer meals. His paperwork had been moved to a special wing. He spent most of his time alone, staring at the wall, mumbling numbers to himself. Sometimes he talked to ghosts. "Johnny, that you?" "Ma, I didn't mean to. He said he was untouchable, but he bled like anyone else." The guards whispered about it in the break room. Said it was spooky, said it felt like watching a legend die every day, but no one felt sorry. Not really. Because for all the cruelty he'd inflicted, for all the lives he'd broken, this ending still felt too easy. Ness had started writing. Not about Capone, not directly, just notes, memories, names. He didn't know what he'd do with them. Maybe nothing. Maybe a book someday. Maybe they'd rot in a drawer like so many untold truths. But he wrote them anyway. Because some stories aren't about justice. Some stories are just the pieces you carry so the world doesn't forget what happened in the dark. July 1931. Capone was transferred to a medical facility wing. By then, he barely recognized his own name. He cried at night, softly, like a child left in the cold. The doctor marked his file. Mental regression increasing. Psychosis present. Aggressive episodes minimal. Memory retention fading. He'd become a man who used to be. A name that still held weight, but had no voice behind it anymore. One day they found him in the corner, curled into a ball, whispering, "Don't let the lights go out. Please, I'll be good." And somewhere, far away, Eliot Ness was sitting by a fire, sipping bourbon and staring into the flames. The world didn't know it, but he'd already left the bureau, turned in his badge, walked out without a speech, no ceremony. He just stopped chasing, because the chase had ended, but the running hadn't. The people still asked. When he passed on the street, they'd nod. Agent Ness. He hated the way it sounded, like the title still mattered. One man at a bar asked him, "Hey, what was he like? Capone?" Ness stared at the glass in his hand. Loud, dangerous, smarter than they thought. The man leaned in. "And you really brought him down?" Ness shook his head. "No, he brought himself down. I just helped." He spent more time alone after that, writing, reading, walking. He never remarried, never ran for office, never gave lectures like the others. Because some men don't wear the past like a badge. They wear it like a bruise that never fades. Back at the medical wing, Capone forgot how to tie his shoes. A nurse had to help him walk to the bathroom. He stopped speaking for days at a time. When he did speak, it was always the same 3 words. Not like this, and no one knew what he meant. But Ness did, even if he never heard them, because the truth about men like Capone, they always believe they're in control, even at the end. And the truth about men like Ness, they never feel like they've done enough, even when they've done the impossible. August 1931. The lake was quiet, windless, like someone had taken the whole sky and put it on pause. Eliot Ness stood at the edge of a wooden pier just outside the city, arms crossed, watching the water. He used to come here when he was younger, before the bureau, before Capone, before his name meant anything to anyone. Back then, the world felt clean. It didn't anymore. Behind him, Rita approached with a picnic basket in one hand and a coffee flask in the other. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him, watching the horizon. "You still haven't shaved," she finally said. He rubbed his chin, rough with uneven stubble. "I'm not chasing anyone anymore. What's the point?" she smirked. "You think peace means letting yourself fall apart? I don't think peace means anything. Then maybe it's not peace you're looking for." Ness didn't reply, because she was right, and he hated how right she always was. That same week, Capone's condition worsened. The prison infirmary filed another report. Cognitive decline progressing, violent outbursts increasing, recognition of staff inconsistent, sleeping irregular, multiple incidents of hallucination. They moved him to a private cell under surveillance, not because he was dangerous, but because they didn't want his story to end in a padded room with piss-stained sheets. He still got visitors sometimes, old friends, distant relatives, a priest who said prayers over him like Capone might still understand them. But Capone didn't speak. He stared at the wall. He laughed at nothing. He sang old songs under his breath with words only he remembered. Word began to leak. Newspapers printed quiet headlines buried in the back pages. Capone fading, once feared gangster, now frail, disoriented, and then another. Warden confirms Capone's mental collapse. Ness read them like someone reading the obituary of a man who hadn't died yet. He sat on the train one morning, a folded newspaper in his lap, a coffee cup cooling in his hand. A stranger beside him pointed to the article. "You believe that?" the man asked. "That a guy like him just breaks?" Ness turned slowly. "Everybody breaks," he said. "It's just a matter of what cracks first." Later that day, Ness visited an old contact, a former reporter who used to cover Capone's empire before it burned. The man's office smelled of ink and cheap tobacco, books stacked like walls around his desk. "I want the real story," Ness said. The reporter leaned back. "What story's that?" "The parts that didn't make the papers, the bribes, the bodies, the judges who vanished, the deals behind closed doors." The reporter squinted. "You sure you want that? Thought you were out." "I am." "Then why dig it up?" Ness took a breath. "Because someday a kid's going to read a headline and think Capone was just a businessman with a temper. I want him to know better." The reporter nodded. "You want him remembered for the blood, not the suits." "Exactly." The man opened a drawer and pulled out a box of clippings, folders, letters. raw pieces of truth no editor had dared run. "You write your version," he said, "and I'll help it stick." That night, Ness wrote the first line of a manuscript on a yellowed page. He didn't fall like a king. He rotted like a coward. Then he crossed it out, started over. This is the story of how power poisons the soul, and how chasing it nearly poisoned mine. That one, he left untouched. Meanwhile, in the infirmary wing, Capone forgot how old he was. He asked a nurse if his birthday had passed. She said yes. He cried. The staff began to treat him less like a prisoner and more like a patient. Even the warden stopped using his last name. Just Al. There was no point keeping him under heavy guard anymore. He didn't remember where he was most days. But on one clear afternoon, for no reason anyone could explain, Capone suddenly sat upright in bed and said, "Tell Ness I ain't scared of him." The nurse froze. "Who?" Capone stared ahead. His eyes looked alive again, just for a flicker. "The agent. The one who followed me through the fire." Then he laughed. A full, loud laugh that echoed through the white-tiled room like something holy and broken at the same time. The next morning, he didn't remember saying it. Rita walked into Ness's apartment a week later carrying two things, a bottle of bourbon and a letter. The letter was from a publisher, an interest letter. She handed it to him without a word. He opened it, scanned it, then dropped it on the table. "You want this out?" she asked. Ness shrugged. "Don't know if I want anything out anymore." "You think the story's over?" "No," Ness said. "I think the story changed, and I didn't notice." She poured him a drink, then one for herself. "To what?" she asked, raising the glass. Ness looked at her. "To the ones who didn't make it." They drank. A few days later, Ness was walking downtown when a kid, maybe 17, stopped him. "You're him, right?" the kid asked. "The guy who took down Capone?" Ness nodded slightly. The kid grinned. "Man, that's crazy. You're like history. History doesn't feel like much when you're living it." "What happened to him?" Ness looked at the kid. "He lost." Then kept walking. September 1931. Capone began losing the ability to speak. Some days he'd say single words, other days only noises. The priest still came, reading scripture. Capone would hum along like a child trying to remember a song he never learned properly. Then one night, something changed. He stood up, unsteady, shaking, and began pacing in his cell, dragging his hands across the wall, whispering to the concrete. The guard on duty approached carefully. "Al," Capone turned, eyes wide. He looked terrified. "Where'd everybody go?" he whispered. "It's so quiet." The guard didn't know what to say. Capone looked around the cell, trembling. "They're all gone," he said, "even the music." Then he collapsed. They revived him, barely. But his mind didn't come back with him. That was the final shift. After that night, he was no longer Al Capone, just a name on a chart, a shuffling body in a uniform, a fading shadow. Ness stood on the shoreline again one night, hands in his pockets, wind slapping against his coat. He wasn't thinking about Capone anymore. He was thinking about Harmon, Delaney, Rita, the men and women who stood beside him in fire and fog and said, "We're with you." He thought about the weight of doing the right thing, not for praise, not for headlines, but because someone had to do it, even when no one was watching. He lit a cigarette, watched the smoke drift up and vanish, then turned and walked back to the city. Not because it needed him anymore, but because he wasn't done living in it. October 1931. Chicago had cooled. The wind felt sharp again, biting against collars and creeping through cracks in brickwork. Autumn came in heavy this year, with copper leaves clogging gutters and smoke rising from chimneys like tired ghosts. Eliot Ness walked with a slower pace these days. His shoes scuffed more. His suits didn't fit quite as tight. People still recognized him, but fewer now. Some would look and whisper, "Isn't that the guy from back then?" Others just passed without a glance. That was the way of things. Fame had a short memory, justice even shorter. He sat in a diner off Polk Street that morning. Same corner booth, same chipped coffee mug, Same newspaper folded in half before he even ordered. The waitress, a young redhead with tired eyes, poured his drink without asking. "Cold out," she said. Ness nodded. "Always is this time of year." "You used to be on the front page," she said, smiling faintly. "Now you're reading it," he smirked. "Safer this way." She left. He sipped, read the headline. Prohibition nears end. Senators push for repeal. That made him stop. He reread the line again. All the bodies, all the blood, all the raids and losses and nights spent chasing men through back alleys with nothing but a badge and a half-working pistol, and it was all about to be undone. He folded the paper, leaned back, and stared out the window at nothing in particular. That same day, 800 miles away in the Atlanta prison infirmary, Al Capone forgot how to eat. He didn't know what the fork was for. He held it like a weapon at first, then like a toy. Then he dropped it entirely and used his fingers, smearing mashed potatoes across the tray like finger paint. The nurse, Sister Eleanor, watched silently, her lips tight. She'd worked in war hospitals, seen men missing legs, lungs, and whole pieces of their minds. But something about this man, once so feared, now struggling to drink from a cup without help, felt more like tragedy than justice. He mumbled something under his breath. "Did you say something, Mr. Capone?" He looked up. His eyes were damp and confused. "Where's my boy?" he asked. Sister Eleanor gently touched his arm. "You don't have a boy, Al." But he shook his head like a stubborn child. No. He was right here. He was holding my hand. Then he started to cry. Ness stood in front of a small podium that night, speaking at a local college. It was supposed to be a guest lecture. Lessons in law and order. They invited him for his name, for the story. But he stood there, looking at the students in their clean coats and neat pens, and felt like a statue someone had dragged in from a different century. "They'll tell you we won," he said after a long pause. "They'll say we got the bad guy, that we saved the city." The room was silent. "But here's what they won't say." He stepped away from the podium. "They won't say how many of us never came back from it. How many went home but never really went home." He looked out over the crowd. "They won't tell you about the nights we lost sleep wondering if we'd become the same thing we were chasing." Someone coughed in the back. He smiled faintly. "You want a lesson in law? Don't chase glory. Chase the truth. And understand that sometimes they don't live in the same place." He left the stage to soft, polite claps. No one stood. November 1931. Capone had stopped walking. His legs had given out one morning. Just stopped. The doctors said it was part of the decline. His muscles weren't receiving the signals. His brain was misfiring like a rusted engine. They put him in a wheelchair. He drooled now, slept most of the day, and when he was awake, he repeated the same word over and over, Ness. Sometimes it came out angry, other times sad, but always the same word, the same obsession. The warden took note, marked it in the file, and moved on. Because what do you do with a ghost that only remembers the man who caught him? Rita found Ness on his building's rooftop, coat flapping in the wind, a drink in one hand. "You really need to stop pretending this is healthy," she said. He didn't answer. She stepped closer. "You okay? Do I look okay?" "You look like a man trying to rewrite his own ending." Ness smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What if there is no ending, just pages running out?" She took the glass from his hand. "Then maybe start a new story." He looked at her, eyes tired. "I'm not made for anything else." "Then let me remind you who you used to be." For a brief moment, he let her. They danced in the living room to an old record. He laughed, really laughed, and for the first time in months she saw a man, not just a shadow. But it didn't last. By morning, he was gone, back at the lake, back walking the streets like a ghost looking for unfinished business. One evening, a letter came. Typed, no return address, just a seal that matched the old bureau file stamps. Ness opened it cautiously. Inside, a single page. "They're trying to write books now, ones that say he wasn't as bad as they made him seem, that he helped poor communities, that he gave people work, that he loved his family. You and I know better." Don't let them forget. No signature, just the initials FR typed at the bottom. He didn't need to guess. Frankie Russo, alive, somewhere, watching. Ness burned the letter, but not the memory. That week, Rita came over again. She brought a stack of blank notebooks and set them on his desk. "What's this?" he asked. "New pages," she said. "You said maybe there's no ending. So, write what comes next." He stared at them for a long moment, then picked up a pen. December 1931. Capone stopped speaking entirely. He no longer recognized the doctors, didn't respond to light, didn't flinch at needles. He just sat in his wheelchair, breathing. Barely. Sometimes, the staff said, his fingers twitched like he was holding a cigar. Other times, his lips moved like he was giving orders. But mostly, he was gone. The warden looked at the last photo ever taken of him. Sunken eyes, slack jaw, crooked posture. "Hard to believe this man once ran a city," he muttered, but a nurse nearby said it best. No, the city just let him borrow it. Ness finished the first chapter of the book. He titled it, "The Price of Untouchable." The opening line, "This isn't a story about winning. It's a story about what we lose trying to win." He didn't know if anyone would read it. Didn't know if he even wanted them to, but he wrote it anyway. Because some truths are only real when you say them out loud. On Christmas Eve, Ness visited Harmon's grave again. He brought no gifts, no flowers, just silence. He knelt in the snow and whispered, "He's still dying." Then added, "But so am I, just slower." A moment passed, the wind whistled, then Ness stood and walked away. January 1932. Chicago moved on. It always did. Bootleggers still poured drinks behind false walls. Cops still took quiet envelopes in quiet bars. And the headlines? They had new faces now, new crimes, new names. Capone's wasn't one of them anymore. Eliot Ness read the morning paper in his apartment, silence stretching through the room like a second skin. He flipped through page after page, not looking for anything, just checking to see if he'd been forgotten yet. He had. Not a word about Capone, not a word about him. He folded the paper, set it down, and stared at the wall for a long while. Then, he picked up his pen. The manuscript was growing, 3 notebooks filled, a fourth half done. It wasn't neat. The pages weren't polished. There were crossouts, blood in the ink. But it was honest. And that's all Ness had left. Rita came by once a week now. Sometimes she helped organize the pages. Sometimes she just sat, reading quietly while Ness muttered to himself across the room, writing the way a man confesses, not to be forgiven, but to be understood. "You ever think you'll publish it?" she asked once. "No," he said, "but I'll finish it." "Why?" "Because I want the truth written down somewhere, before someone else replaces it with something cleaner." Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Capone was incontinent now. The orderlies changed his bedding 3 times a day. He didn't speak anymore, didn't blink much either, just sat with his head tilted forward, his jaw slack, eyes dull. Every now and then, his lips moved, but no one could hear what he said. One of the nurses, a young woman new to the ward, asked an older staffer, "Is that really him?" The staffer shrugged. Was. They didn't call him Capone anymore. They didn't call him anything, just Room 14B. Because you can't fear a ghost that doesn't even know its own name. Back in Chicago, Ness was contacted by a young writer from New York. She'd read about him in an old clipping and wanted to interview him for a biography of American crime fighters. Ness refused at first, but after Rita convinced him, he agreed to a one-time meeting. The woman, bright-eyed and too polite, showed up with a notepad full of questions. "What drove you to bring down Capone?" Ness answered. "A dead girl and a quiet street. That's all it took. Do you believe justice was served?" "No," she blinked. "But you won." Ness shook his head. "Capone went to prison for taxes, not the people he buried, not the families he shattered, not the bodies pulled out of the lake. But he was punished. So is cancer. Eventually." She stopped writing. "Do you think people remember him wrong?" "I think people remember what makes them feel comfortable. and monsters make them uncomfortable, so they rewrite them as misunderstood. She nodded. And how do you want to be remembered? Ness looked away. I don't. At the infirmary, Capone's breathing had grown shallow. Each inhale sounded like gravel being pulled through a pipe. The doctor charted it. End-stage degeneration. Neurological function below minimum, memory unresponsive, reflexes fading. He was dying. But it was slow, like watching a candle flicker for hours before it finally gives up. The priest came more often now, not because Capone asked for him, but because he felt wrong not coming. He'd stand beside the bed, read from the Bible, sprinkle holy water over a forehead that no longer reacted to touch. One day, he leaned in and whispered, "If there's anything left in you, this is the time to let it go." Capone twitched. Just once. The priest kept reading. That same week, Ness was invited to speak on a small radio segment, 15 minutes on the subject of justice in America. He almost didn't go. But Rita pushed him, so he sat behind a microphone, headphones over his ears, the hum of dead air waiting for him to fill it. The host cued him. "You have the floor, Mr. Ness." Ness leaned forward. "There's no such thing as justice," he said, a pause. "Not really. There's just what we're willing to live with. Some men steal a loaf of bread and rot in a cell, others poison a city and die with clean hands." He adjusted the mic. "I did what I could. I made the machine slow down even if I couldn't break it." Another pause. "If that's justice, I'll take it." The host cut to commercial early. Winter came hard that year. Snow covered the streets in sheets of gray. The lake froze at the edges. Smoke curled from chimneys like whispers. Capone didn't see it. He was unconscious for the last 5 days. Sister Eleanor stayed with him through most of it. She changed the IV bags, kept the sheets clean, said prayers even though she didn't think he could hear. But on the 6th day, he woke up, just for a minute. His lips moved. She leaned close. "What is it, Al?" He stared past her, through her, toward something no one else could see, and whispered, "Tell Ness." He was right. Then his eyes closed, and never opened again. Word reached Chicago 3 days later. The wire was short, cold. Alphonse Capone, deceased, cardiac failure, January 25th, 1932, 7:12 p.m. Rita brought the telegram to Ness, her eyes unreadable. He unfolded it, read it once, then again. No reaction. She sat across from him, waiting. He finally said, "Wasn't supposed to end like that. You wanted him to suffer? I wanted him to understand. Maybe he did." He looked out the window. No, he died the same way he lived, surrounded by silence. The city didn't hold a service, no processions, no black cars lined down Michigan Avenue. Capone's body was shipped to his family, buried with a few relatives at a small plot outside the city. A plain headstone, no speeches, no crowds, just cold dirt, and the whisper of a name that once shook governments. Ness didn't go. But he wrote one last thing in his manuscript. Al Capone died at 79 pounds, without a mind, without a voice, without a name anyone feared. He was buried like a stray dog. That was justice enough. Then he closed the notebook and didn't write again for months. The world spun forward. Prohibition ended in 1933. Liquor became legal again. Speakeasies turned into clubs. Gangsters got better at hiding. Politicians smiled wider. And the old stories? They became books, films, glossy rewrites sold to men in suits who never held a gun in their life. Ness watched it all, didn't protest, didn't correct anyone. Because the truth doesn't argue. It waits. Sometimes strangers still asked him, what was he really like? And he'd smile and say, a mirror. They never understood. But that was okay. He wasn't talking to them. February 1932. 2 weeks after Capone's death, Eliot Ness received a package. No return address, no note. Just a brown-wrapped box the size of a brick, with his name written in crooked, faded letters. He didn't open it right away, just stared at it for almost an hour, turning it over in his hands, checking the corners, pressing gently to feel what was inside. Rita sat across the room, watching him in silence. "You think it's a threat?" she finally asked. Ness shook his head. "If someone wanted me dead, they'd have mailed a bullet. This feels heavier." She walked over and stood beside him. "You gonna open it?" He looked up. "You ever open something knowing it won't let you close it again?" She didn't answer. He peeled the paper away. Inside was a wooden cigar box, worn smooth, hinges rusted slightly, the kind you'd expect to find in a drawer in the back of an old bar. He lifted the lid. Inside, stacked neatly, a black and white photo of Capone in a suit, younger, laughing at a dinner table. A letter, yellowed with time. And something Ness didn't expect, his own name, scrawled on a scrap of torn stationery in Capone's unmistakable handwriting. Just one word. "Sorry." Ness sat down, hard. He unfolded the letter. It wasn't long, barely a paragraph. The writing was shaky, misspelled in places, dated almost a year before Capone's death. To Eliot, "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone or close. They tell me I ain't well in the head no more. I don't remember much, but I remember you. I remember you wouldn't stop. I hated you for it. Then I respected it. I know I did wrong. I hurt people. I lied. I stole. But you kept coming anyway. Maybe part of me hoped you would. So, yeah, sorry. For what it's worth." A.C. Ness folded it slowly, held it between his palms. Rita sat down beside him. "He didn't have to send that." "No," Ness said, "which makes it worse." That night, Ness walked the streets. No coat, just the cold against his skin. The city had changed, or maybe he had. He passed a bar on the corner that used to be a speakeasy during the peak of Capone's rule. Now it had a neon sign and a jazz band playing inside. Through the window, young men in crisp suits clinked glasses. Girls in red lipstick laughed against their shoulders. They'd never know. Not what it cost, not what was taken, not what was buried beneath those smiling streets. He kept walking, and behind his eyes, memories unspooled like an old film reel. Crooked alleys, burning crates, broken windows, confessions whispered behind locked doors, and one face that wouldn't fade. Capone, at his height, at his end. Back in the apartment, he put the letter away, not with the case files, not with the notebooks. In a small wooden box, the one that held his father's watch, his badge, a folded ribbon from his mother's funeral. The things you don't throw away, even when they stop meaning something. March 1932. The Bureau offered Ness a job again. "Come back," the letter said. "The city needs you." He didn't reply. What would he say? That he'd already given the best parts of himself? That he wasn't a weapon anymore? That there was no joy in chasing ghosts? Rita found him in the park one morning, sitting on a bench, staring at a statue of some general from a war no one cared about anymore. "You're not eating," she said. "I'm writing," he replied. "You're not sleeping either." "That's because I'm remembering." She sat beside him. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked. "For the world?" "For you." He rubbed his eyes. "Not really." "Well, maybe it's time." He looked over. "I don't know what life looks like when I'm not chasing something." "Then chase something new." He smiled. "Like what?" She shrugged. "Me." And just like that, the silence broke. The manuscript was almost finished. 8 notebooks now, pages full of names, places, regrets. He wrote not like a historian, but like a man carving out a truth no one else would carry if he didn't. And one night, near the final chapter, he wrote, "I didn't win. Not really. I just held the line long enough for the storm to pass. And when it did, no one looked back to see who was still standing. But I was. Alone, maybe. But standing." He underlined it twice, then closed the book. Weeks later, he mailed it. Not to a publisher, to a library, no cover letter, no explanation. Just a stamped envelope with a note on the inside. For the shelf they never built for the ones who stayed quiet after the war. April 1932. Spring came in slow. The ice melted from the lake. Trees began to breathe again. The city shook off winter like a drunk wiping blood from his nose. And Ness? He let the light in again, little by little. He shaved, bought new shoes, took Rita to a dance hall one Friday. They didn't know the steps, didn't care. He laughed once so loud the band stopped playing, and for a second, he wasn't the man who brought down Capone. He was just a man who survived something that tried to kill him. That same week, he walked past a newsstand. A magazine cover showed an artist's sketch of Capone, stylized, handsome, movie star smooth. The headline, Robin Hood or Monster, reframing the Capone legacy. Ness stared at it for a long time, then bought the copy and read every word. It painted Capone as a complex man, a product of hard times, a symbol of rebellion. It mentioned Ness once, barely, as a young Treasury agent obsessed with law. No mention of the blood, the bodies, the names. Ness closed the magazine and didn't burn it. He folded it neatly, put it in his coat. Because that was the final war, wasn't it? The war for memory. That night, Rita found him staring at the cover. "You okay?" He nodded. "Just tired." "You want to fight them?" "No." "Then what?" "I want to outlive them." May 1932. One morning, a package arrived for Ness. Inside, a bound leather, his manuscript, returned from the library, no note, no signature. But on the first page, a message was written in red ink. "Some truths are too dangerous for shelves, but we read every word." He smiled, because that was enough. One night, he visited a quiet bar. No music, just the clink of glasses and low talk. He sat alone, ordered bourbon. The bartender, older man with tired eyes, looked at him and said, "You look like someone who did something important once." Ness raised his glass. "I did." "Did it matter?" "I'm still here, aren't I?" The bartender nodded. "Then yeah, it mattered." June 1932. The lake was still that morning. The sky wore a dull gray, low and pressing. You couldn't hear the city from out on the pier. Not the cars, not the voices, not even the occasional cough of a streetcar. It was just wind and wood and water, and Eliot Ness sitting alone at the edge. He looked thinner these days, less like the face in the old news clippings. The suits hung a little looser. The fire behind the eyes, that thing that once made him walk headfirst into blood-soaked speakeasies, was no longer ablaze, more like a coal, still warm, still alive, but tired. He pulled out the last letter he ever got, typed, anonymous. "We've turned Capone into folklore. You're a footnote now. But those of us who know the truth, we remember. Thank you." No name, no return address. Just that. He folded it back up, put it in his coat, and stared at the water. Inside his apartment, the walls were mostly bare. No awards, no framed newspaper clippings, just a shelf with 8 notebooks bound together with twine. His story. The real one. The one no one wanted to publish. He didn't care anymore, because it wasn't for readers. It was for himself, to say, "I was there. I saw it. I didn't run." Rita still visited, though not as often now. Life was picking up for her again. She'd started volunteering at a school, said she liked teaching history. "The clean version?" Ness asked once. She smiled. "I tell them the truth, just not all of it." He nodded. "That's how it should be." "You still writing?" "No, I said all I had to say." "Then maybe now you can live." He didn't reply, but he did pour her tea. That summer, Capone's grave was vandalized. Someone spray-painted the word "coward" across the stone. It made the papers. People debated whether it was fair. Some said it was disrespectful. Others said it was honest. Ness didn't comment, but he clipped the article, folded it once, slid it between the last pages of his manuscript, not out of malice, just as proof. August 1932. He received a visitor, a young man, barely 20, wearing a coat too large and shoes too clean. He knocked twice, stood straight, and introduced himself as a reporter from a small journal in Cincinnati. "I want to talk about the truth," he said. "About Capone, about what really happened." Ness let him in. They spoke for 3 hours. He told him everything, not the myth, not the story you put in a movie, but the cold, dry facts. The ones that didn't sell books. The ones that ended with files lost and bodies buried without names. At the end of it, the boy just stared. "You really think it was worth it?" he asked. Ness leaned back. "No, I think it was necessary. There's a difference." The reporter nodded, left his card, promised to get it right. Ness never heard from him again. By fall, Ness began to slow. The walk shortened. The phone rang less. Some days he didn't leave the apartment at all. He'd sit by the window, cup of weak coffee in hand, watching the people outside. Younger now, faster, smarter maybe, or maybe just noisier. Sometimes one of them would glance up and nod, but most didn't. And that was all right, because they didn't know what was buried beneath those sidewalks. But he did. One day in late September, he walked past a small bookstore. In the window was a fresh copy of a biography titled Capone, the Gentleman Gangster. The cover was a stylized sketch, sharp hat, polished smile. The back described Capone as a misunderstood businessman and a symbol of rebellion during a broken time. Ness bought the book, read every word, then threw it in the trash. Because that was how history worked. It rewrote itself, and if you didn't fight it, it rewrote you too. But not everything fades. One evening, Ness walked to the lake and found a boy fishing with his grandfather. The boy was asking about Al Capone. He'd heard the name at school. "Was he really that bad?" the boy asked. The old man looked up. "He ran the city like a kingdom, but there was a man who stopped him." "What was his name?" The old man paused, thinking. "I can't remember." Ness stood nearby, listening. Then walked away without saying a word. October 1932. Rita found him in his chair, dozing, a notebook on his lap. She sat beside him, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. "Still dreaming about it?" she whispered. His eyes cracked open. "Every night." She reached out and took his hand. "You think people will remember?" He looked out the window. No, not all of it, but maybe just enough. He never finished another book, never made a speech, never gave a statement, but the notebook stayed on that shelf, waiting for someone who wanted to hear the version without shine, the one where heroes bled quietly and villains died in silence. Final note in the manuscript, written by hand. "I outlived him. That's not a victory. It's just survival. And survival doesn't get you a statue. Just a quiet apartment and a name they forget to teach. But if you're reading this, maybe I didn't disappear completely. My name was Eliot Ness, and I didn't let the devil walk without a fight." Years later. The notebooks ended up in a small archive, a dusty room, a back shelf. A grad student found them by accident. He read them once, then again, then wrote a paper, then a thesis, then a book. And in a slow, quiet ripple, the truth began to breathe again. Not loud, not glamorous, but real. Because truth doesn't rot. It waits. And in the end, Capone died a prisoner to his own mind. Ness died with his sanity intact, but carrying the ghosts of every man he couldn't save. The city? It forgot. But the streets still whispered their names in the cracks. And sometimes, that's all history is. Not a celebration. Not a punishment. Just a reminder that someone once stood between the fire and the rest of us, and didn't run.